Hello everyone. So, this week we have been discussing about the basics of wastewater management, treatment and recycling, and in the last session, last lecture for this week, this first week, we will be talking about what are the prime issues and challenges and where we stand in terms of national status and international status in wastewater management. So, that is what we are going to discuss. To begin with, the global scenario if we see of the wastewater management. So, the United Nations World Water Development Report of 2017 last year has sort of summarized some of the data, and if we refer that, if we see that, so it is interesting to see that the yellow blocks that you see here are for untreated wastewater in 2015, which is baseline, which is sort of measured or collected or gathered or estimated data, and the grey one are actually the aspirations for 2030. So, by 2030 the targets are that to get from yellow to the grey point. Now, if we see the high income countries or developed countries, the existing or 2015 status suggests that around 30% of water remains untreated and 70% is treated. The targets are to increase that 70 to around 85%, so that only 15% remains untreated and rest is properly treated and managed wastewater. If we see the upper middle income countries, okay, many of the European countries fall in this category. So, we see that close to 60%, in fact little over 60% of wastewater produced is still untreated. Okay. The targets are to basically cut it down by 50%, okay. So, bring it down to 31%. The lower middle income countries like we have India falls probably in the lower middle income country that way. So, in such countries the average or the typical value of the untreated wastewater in 2015 is around 70%. So, 30% is getting treated, 28% if you see the 72 number. So, 28% is roughly getting treated and 72% is untreated, and again by 2013 in the 15 years duration it was proposed or aspired to cut it down by another 50%, so that around your 60-64 or 2/3 of water at least is treated. In the low income countries the conditions are very pathetic, only around 8%, which is in fact less than 10% of generated sewage gets some sort of treatment and 92% goes untreated. So, the conditions are very alarming here, and the targets is again to cut down by at least 50% by 2030. So, that is the sort of a summary of global status. Okay. The detail various country wise details are available in various reports here and there. So, someone interested can actually Google it and explore it that way. If we look at Indian scenario, so we are very much on the average of lower upper lower middle income group countries, okay, and that way totally on an average our 70% water goes 70% wastewater goes untreated and around 30% gets some degree of treatment. Okay. If we see different class wise, so in the class 1 cities where the population is greater than 1 lakh, okay, this survey of around 500 such cities with the population greater than 1 lakh says that 68% of water remains untreated and 32% gets treated. In class 2 cities, 410 class 2 cities which has a population of less than 1 lakhs, 92% gets untreated. So, here we are as like close to the low income group countries. Okay. Overall, if we see, because most of the population or major population lives in here. So, if we take the average that way of 908 cities. So, this is the total, because this number is fairly low if you see as opposed to this number. So, this dominates the value, and the total, if we see the produced sewage which is generated in million liters per day, this is the sewage which is treated in million liters per day, and around 70% of it sort of does not receive treatment. Only we have installed capacity of 30%. Now, 30% is the capacity installed. Of these 30% also, it is not that they are running with the full capacity or entire treatment is being provided satisfactorily. So, there are issues in with that 30% as well. However, the large chunk, the 70% of wastewater goes untreated, particularly sewage we are talking about here. So, if we see our 12th 5-year plan by the Planning Commission, which now under the new government regimes has been Niti Aayog has been established in place of Planning Commission. Okay. Planning Commission has been dissolved. So, their report on urban development highlights that around close to 5,000 cities and towns in India lack even a partial centralized sewerage network, and almost 50% of the household in metropolitan cities such as Bengaluru do not have sewerage connection. So, even in our major cities and towns like Bengaluru, Calcutta, Mumbai, we say that they have their sewer network and all that, but a large chunk of population, particularly living in the slums or suburban areas, are not connected to the sewerage systems. Okay. So, for say in Mumbai, almost 50% of household, 50% means half of the city is not connected to the sewerage network. They do not have sewerage connections. Okay. So, that is the state. Although this like data keeps on updating, keeps on changing. So, if we see this urban sanitation situation in India, okay, which was provided in the strategic plan for Ministry of Urban Development in of 2011 to 16. So, this survey was done somewhere around 2010-11, okay, and through this pilot studies, pilot surveys, it was like sanitation status of the country was attempted to establish. So, if you see the toilet coverage, the benchmark was 100%, the lowest percentage in the city was around 17% and the highest was 100%. Sewerage network coverage, again some cities has as low as 4.2% sewerage network coverage, although the highest was 100%. Wastewater collection efficiency, again almost 100% to your 2.8% only. So, in many cities wastewater is not at all being collected. The wastewater treatment adequacy, some cities has like capacity, over capacity. So, they have capacities larger than which is being generated or which is being collected. So, that is why we see around 180% treatment adequacy is there, but it is as low as 2.5% also, or almost negligible in a few cities. The quality of wastewater treatment, if you see, almost 1/3 at places to 100%. Extent of reuse and recycling of wastewater almost negligible, 0.6% in some cities, highest was close to 35-36%. So, still large part of water has not been reused in any of the city. Cost recovery aspect, some cities are running very poor, some are actually even recovering more than the cost. collection efficiencies and complaint readdressal. So, on these scales counting was done, and there was a benchmark suggested which was good 100% for most of the things, and said that by the end of 2016 at least 20% of wastewater should be recycled. Okay. However, that has not been achieved though, and the billing and collection efficiency was supposed to 90% that way. This data is old, and particularly since the our new government has taken chairs, a lot of efforts has been done towards improving the sanitation and sewerage systems. Okay. The data keeps on updating. For the urban setups, much data is not available. On a village front, so when the Swachh Bharat Mission Gramin was launched on 2nd October in 2014, the sanitation coverage was around 40% at that time, 39%, which has increased to 76% in January 2018. So, by the end of December 2017 it was 74%, 2% further increased in the month of January, and the targets are around 100% by the end of 2018. So, in this year, by the end of this year, the target is that there should be 100% toilet facilities or 100 sanitation coverage, in a sense basically toilet facilities, particularly for village purpose. Village purpose sanitation does not mean the villages are connected with the sewer line. Okay. So, there should not be any misconception. The sanitation coverage means the toilet facilities here. Okay. It is not the sewer line connections. Villages sewer line connection almost negligible even today, but the toilet facilities had at least increased this in this Swachh Bharat mission, and in order to make India open defecation free. So, these are the kind of status or situations about the sanitation in India. Now, if we look at the major issues and challenges, so what we see that there is increasing water demand and wastewater production, because water demand is increasing, more water is being consumed, and as a result the wastewater which is being produced is also increasing. So, there is increase in the wastewater production with the population growth, with the urbanization, with the industrialization. Now, apart from the increase in the quantity, because the quantity of sewage is increasing, there is deterioration in the quality as well in terms of emerging contaminants which are appearing in municipal as well as industrial wastewater. Now, what are these emerging contaminants? These are a sort of pollutant or contaminant or chemicals which earlier was not people were not much bothered about these. Okay, they were not considering these as a contaminants, primarily because they were not present in the water could be one of the reason, and the second reason people were not concerned enough, never detected them. Okay, there was not the detection facilities to that precise level were not available in earlier ages. Now, we have very much advanced equipments available. We can detect any chemical, any contaminant to even the part per trillion level also we can detect. PPT level, PPB level, PPM level, we can easily detect these contaminants. So, since we are able to detect these in the water, and we know that these chemicals impose some threat to the human health and to the ecosystem. So, we have started referring them as a contaminant, and these type of contaminants are generally referred as emerging contaminants. These are pesticides, these are the personal care products, pharmaceuticals. Okay. So, these products which are earlier not that used, they were not introduced in the nature, they were not introduced in the world, and as now they have their use is basically increasing, they have started appearing in the natural waters as well through the wastewater, and these group of contaminants are referred as emerging contaminants. So, even if we let us say plan a treatment and provide a treatment, our conventional treatment systems often work for removal of the conventional pollutants, the organic load, the sediment, the bacteria, microorganisms, these things. But these toxic chemicals, like no conventional treatment system targets removing pesticides, no conventional treatment system target removing pharmaceuticals. There are many personal healthcare products which cosmetics and all that, which imposes lot many chemicals which we use in our household, and then, like, let us say you are using a face wash or you are using some face pack and then washing in the sink, and it is letting flow with the water. So, it is eventually going to the sewer system. So, these kind of contaminants which are more and more getting introduced in the water through wastewater are typically referred as emerging contaminants. So, these emerging contaminants appearing in municipal and industrial effluents, industrial wastewaters, are also one of the major challenges, how to handle that when we are talking about recycling or reusing. So, we have to sure that even the treatment is provided to the fullest degree, and the water which is being used for the reuse purpose, particularly for the contact reuse purpose, are totally safe. The pollution of freshwater resources due to wastewater disposal is another major challenge, as we discussed, and the problem is that it is actually, our nature usually had some capacity to withstand pollution load, but that has almost exhausted, and that resulting in the pollution of our freshwater resources, which is we are already living in a sort of state of almost water stressed country, and not only us, a large part of world that way. So, the large part of world is already under water stress, and further pollution of the whatsoever available water resources, freshwater resources, is basically further deteriorating the situation. So, on seeing this, it sort of becomes essential that wastewater recycling is not only an option, but it is actually steadily becoming unavoidable. Okay. We cannot let these emerging contaminants pollute our water systems, we cannot let the our freshwater resources go pollute that way, and with the water increasing water stress, how we are going to fulfill our water demands. So, wastewater is alternate resource for water as well, and our water demand is increasing. So, why not use this one as a resource for water. So, this way it is steadily becoming unavoidable. One of the major challenges faced in the wastewater management is whether we should go for centralized management or decentralized management. Okay. So, if we see the concept of centralized management, so let us take an example that there are many household colonies and all that are living. So, these all are connected through sewer lines, and eventually everything is coming at just one point, okay, to the wastewater treatment plant. So, this kind of system is called centralized system, where everything from the entire city, the effluent is getting collected at one point, and it is being processed, either treated or disposed of, whatsoever is done at that particular point. So, it is a centralized system. Decentralized system, on the other hand, has sort of managing at a smaller scale. So, we can basically, for this section we can install a water treatment plant right here. For this colony we can install a water treatment plant right here. These, for small things, we can have some smaller water treatment plants. Okay. This we can have another water treatment plant over here. Central part we can have another water treatment plant. So, we, instead of just one big water treatment plant managing everything, we can have a decentralized several small water treatment plants. Now, the decentralization is good, could be good actually at a particular scale. Okay. For this case, for first case, if you see, so what is happening, that some household is generating some sewage here. So, this sewage has to be bought here, and then it travels a hell lot of distance for reaching here. So, the sewage has to be transported to a great distance, to a large distance. In the meantime, there are issues related to there might be possibility of, let us say, some infiltration thing happening. You have to have that size of sewer lines, because this line, if you see, it is collecting waste from this zone. So, for entire this zone, so how big pipe size you need, how much pumping stations you need, how you can basically transport or channelize this all entire sewer to here, and then you have to make a big size treatment plant for that. Okay. That is your centralized option. In decentralized option, what happens that since things are managed at relatively smaller scale, local scale, the transportation part reduces greatly. So, the transportation part is reduced. However, here you are making just one treatment plant of big size, big capacity. Instead, here you will if you see 3 here 6 plus 4 10 plus 11. So, this has one treatment plant, one say STP, and this has 11 STPs. So, instead of 1 you have to build 11, although the capacity of this one is equal to the sum of all these 11 STPs. Okay. Because this is also the water which is being generated are the same. So, same amount is supposed to be channelized here. So, the capacity of this 1 STP is equal to that of 11 STP, but when you make just 1 instead of 11, your cost reduces a lot. So, there is a cost reduction here in the treatment, but there is a cost enhancement in the transportation here. Plus, there are more severe problems could arises. You are transporting it, if let us say there is a breakage in here, you cannot do anything, this portion will there might be issue in here, there is no alternate arrangements available. Here it is a smaller scale, so management is more effective. Okay. It can be more easily managed, it can be more easily observed, seen, handled, improvised. The quality of wastewater, which is, let us say, the waste that you generated here, by the time it is travelling here, its quality may further get deteriorate. Okay. It may undergo certain reactions, it can actually further foul smell and this kind of things started coming in. Here you will relatively get fresher sewage, because it as soon as it is generated, it is transported here and it is managed on this scale. So, the transportation time and this thing has reduced drastically. So, there are some good aspects about both. This the centralized system is more cost effective in terms of treatment management, the manpower requirement would be less, because you will not be you need not to have run 11 sewage treatment plants. Here there are some certain other type of advantages. Okay. First thing, because you are managing at local scale, so maybe if you are planning for recycling and all that, you can, because if you try to figure it out, if you want to intend to dispose it somewhere, that is fine, but if you are trying to recycle this water, so after treatment, if you want to recycle here, you will again have to channelize this water here. Here you are having a treatment plant, if you want to recycle at this point, you can quickly get this water here and recycle it, reuse it for certain purpose. So, all these advantages are there. The management is maybe little more costly here, maybe little more costly in the decentralized system, but it is much more effective in decentralized system. However, the extreme decentralized is that when you have a treatment plant at every household, which is not practically possible. So, one has to get an idea of optimum degree of decentralization. Even if you want to decentralize, see, in a city of where there are 1 lakh household, you cannot go for 1 lakh treatment plants, that is totally rubbish idea. So, one has to actually come forward to see how effectively, let us say, make a group of 1 treatment plant for 500 households, how many will be needed, 1 treatment plant for 1000 households, how many will be needed, or 1 treatment plant for 5000 households. So, which is the optimum scale for decentralization, optimum scale which gives you the desired opportunities, desired management efficiencies, the cost efficiencies or financial efficiencies. So, all those things need to be taken care of, and then one can opt for centralized versus decentralized management system. For smaller towns, one centralized system could be good enough, but for much larger towns it is better to go for decentralized system on a optimum scale. So, that is one question which often comes, whether to go for centralized system or decentralized management of the wastewater. Okay. Other major issues and challenges, if we see, well, these are mostly common things. Many of us know what are the major challenges. First thing is, there is lack of awareness. So, people are not very much concerned about the wastewater management, sewer management. The municipalities often have the responsibility of providing water supply as well as making sanitation or sewerage arrangements. Now, people are much more bothered and much more concerned about water supply, which is obvious, because that is the resource that they are getting and eventually planning to use it or consume it. So, if you cut down a water supply of a say of a street for a day, you will see that people coming on street and all that, all those things can happen, can take place. If you cut down if you block a sewerage line for a day, people will not bother that much, because their water needs are being fulfilled, they are getting water, their daily work, their routine work is taking place, they do not bother much. Whereas with the sewer, because this is something which they have already discharged, which they have let it go from households, until unless it is completely choked and it is coming back into their houses, they will not bother much about this. So, this one of the lack of awareness or lack of intent of giving due importance to the sewage management has been one of the major problems so far. So, that is one of the major challenges that one has to overcome. Of course, there is a lack of finance. So, because a good sewerage network installed and a good treatment capacity needs lot of money, and how this economics can be made sustainable or can be managed is to be seen, but initial investments are huge. Okay. And that huge investment, it has to be obviously come from government or some alternative sources. So, and particularly in the low income countries, people the governments are not willing to spend that much onto the sewer aspect, they are much more concerned about the water. Lack of political will is one of the another reason. Okay. As we have been discussing, that water is given far more important than sewerage. So, in the in election campaigns and all that, also you will see lot of promises are being made towards the water supply, towards the water tariff. So, this somebody says we will make water free, somebody says that we will ensure that round the clock supply to the households. So, all those things are included for water. There is a very little or not much attention is given to the sewerage, even in the political campaigns as well. The environmental footprint of sewer management or wastewater management is needs to be properly worked out. Okay. We can manage it sustainably, there are resources available. If we withdraw that resource, if we are dumping it, there is a sort of we are spoiling our environment, lot of contaminant being added to environment, that hampers our environment. Alternatively, we can treat it, reuse it in a possible way. So, how much what are the environmental footprint of all the different options need to be evaluated. What is the energy consumption and from where it is going to come is another challenge. Okay. However, particularly because the wastewater are usually rich in organic matter, and There are anaerobic processes which we will discuss later on, can actually produce also some energy. So, at least some cases are effectively managed, effectively handled, some these processes can be made energy sustainable as well. So, without any requirement of additional energy. However, the conventional treatment systems requires lot of energy, typical aerobic systems requires lot of energy, and from where that energy is going to come, what is the associated footprint of that energy, or what is the cost for that energy also is one of the issues, major issues. From where we are going to get trained and skilled manpower, because the effective management of sewer, effective management of wastewater, if we see the treatment, recycling, the quality control, all those aspects need well trained, well educated and well skilled manpower, and there is a lack of people trained, educated in this sector. So, particularly as if we are talking about the decentralization thing. So, these days you go to Delhi, Bangalore, all the metros. So, new households coming in, they have to have a mandatory STP installed in there itself. Okay. Now, so who will operate that STP? Are the person deployed to operate those treatment facilities, those treatment plant, or those systems are well qualified to do that, or well skilled to do that? That is a big question. Okay. So, there is a need of human resources development in this area. Okay. That is one of the major issues, and then development of adaptable technologies. There are many technologies available in the market, but we have to identify based on the cost, based on the adaptability, based on the location, based on the suitability, based on the ease of operation. So, how many technologies sort of justify these categories, okay, and can be accepted, adopted and implemented in Indian conditions, need to be seen. So, that is one of the aspect. And then there are quality control of treated wastewater, particularly when we are talking about recycling. It's very essential to have a good quality control. You cannot, you have a recycling plant, or if your treatment capacity failed and you have sent that water to somebody's household and a foul smell or bad smell has started coming in. So, it is going to basically it is going to be a disaster in that case. There will be a lot of agitation will coming in. So, a good quality control on the treated wastewater is must, okay, and that also should be ensured. So, these are the major challenges which one should be basically looking at. We will explore some of these points in the due course of this subject. Okay. So, we conclude the first week's discussion here. I thank you for joining. This was the introductory sort of material about the course in general and about the wastewater treatment, recycling aspects. Next week onwards, we will progressively started discussing the first thing that we will be discussing is the estimation, or how much sewage is generated. So, what the qualitative and quantitative estimation of the sewage is that we are going to discuss next. Thank you.